Good evening. Welcome to tonight's online Colorado Book Awards finalist reading. My name is Josephine Jones, and I direct programs in the Center for the Book for Colorado Humanities. Everything we do at Colorado Humanities is a team effort, and I would particularly like to thank Chris Goff here, who's producing for us tonight, for taking the lead on moving these readings online. We would not be here without her dedication and brilliance. Tanya Albright is behind our logo, co-hosting again here for technical assistance. I'd like to thank our board of directors and the army of other volunteers who selected the finalist books. And now I'll let everyone know how this will go. We ask finalists and speakers to mute their microphones unless they're the one talking or the one asking a question. This will help us all hear better. And for attendees, your microphones are currently muted. We invite you to introduce yourself and let us know you're here by typing your name and any contact information you'd like to share in the chat. I was lucky enough to be on a national call with program directors around the country today about the meaning of putting online humanities programs at this time. And we're actually coming in as leaders nationally doing this. We have 10 times the reach through online readings that we had in person because people can tune in from everywhere and anytime on Facebook Live. So thank you all for being here and being part of this pivoting that our staff is doing really well. If you have a question for the author, please type it in the chat feature along with your name and your contact information, and we'll help the authors find those questions and get back to you. And although we are online this year, instead of snug in the book bar with a treat and a beverage, we can still purchase books through the Book Bar's website. And Book Bar is our co-host for the readings and the event, and will gladly mail books to you. Our sponsors also bravely continue their support as we go online. Denver-based Outskirts Press, a longtime sponsor of the Colorado Center for the Book, stands ready to help authors develop, publish, and market their books. Colorado Sun is also providing funding and is featuring weekly Sunlit excerpts and interviews from many of our Colorado authors' books. So we want to thank them, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and all of you for being here. Let's all use hashtag CO Humanities at Home. That gets us in a sort of national group of postings, and hashtag CBA 2020 as we post about our experiences with the finalists and their work. Now, I am particularly delighted tonight to welcome Adrienne Miller as our MC, a food writer, attorney, and certified barbecue judge. Adrienne is the executive director of the Colorado Council of Churches, the author of several books, including Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, and The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of the African Americans who have fed our first families, from the Washingtons to the Obamas. Was a 2018 finalist for the 2018 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work Nonfiction and the Colorado Book Award for History. Adrienne, thanks.
Thank you, Josephine. I'm pleased to introduce you to 12 talented writers whose books have been named by the Colorado Book Award selectors as the finalists in the general nonfiction, history, and pictorial categories. The finalists from the general nonfiction category will start, followed by the finalists in history and pictorial categories. We will try to move quickly so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. Our first reader tonight is Christy Ashwaden, reading from her general nonfiction book, Good to Go, What the Athlete and All of Us Can Learn from the Strange Science of Recovery, a National Magazine Award finalist and a New York Times bestseller. She is the co-host of Emerging Form, a podcast about creativity. She has written for dozens of publications, including the Washington Post, NPR.org, Smithsonian, and O. Take it away, Christy.
Almost forgot to unmute. I just want to say I'm so honored and humbled to be here. It's really wonderful to be a part of this. My book just came out in paperback in February, but I'm going to be reading from the hardcover copy. And so this is a book about sports recovery. but it is also a book about science, and in particular, the scientific process and how we know that things are true, how we assess evidence, things that I think are actually especially relevant right now. I'll just say that I'm a journalist and I've spent the last 6 or 8 weeks writing almost exclusively about COVID. So I hope that everyone here is well. And with that, I'm going to start. This is a passage from the introduction to my book. And I'll just say one thing that's kind of fun about the book is that so many of the scenes in the book take place here in Colorado. And that is also true for this passage that I'm going to read. This is a scene from the Denver Sports Recovery Center, which, as you can guess, is in Denver. And it's basically sort of like a gym, except instead of exercise equipment, they have all this fancy, weird stuff for aiding recovery. So, before ending my visit, I tried a strange device I'd been eyeing since I arrived. The Swiss swing is everyone's favorite, my recovery assistant told me as she sat me down in a chair next to the device. It looked like a giant trash can set on its side and covered with a yoga mat. The device was attached to a giant articulating arm that allowed you to adjust its angle. Sitting in the chair, I lifted my feet on top of the cylinder. At the flip of a switch, the whole cylinder shook at a fast, mesmerizing pace. The vibrations felt soothing, even hypnotic. I could almost see the soreness being shaken out of my muscles. After about 5 minutes on my feet, I scooched my legs further up the device so my calves were centered on the top of the cylinder. 5 minutes later, I was standing next to the Swiss swing, nearly straddling it, getting some good vibrations on one hamstring at a time. I was jutting my butt onto the self-serve massage barrel when a middle-aged guy who looked like he'd been working off a small beer belly approached to ask me how I liked it. This wasn't as creepy as it sounds. He was training for a marathon, he says, and he had recently started coming to Denver Sports Recovery because his long runs were beating him up. He liked the Swiss swing too, and I realized that he wasn't just being friendly. He was waiting for me to finish so he could have his turn. How did I end up in a fancy gym, jiggling my butt on a giant vibrator? When I was a serious athlete in the 1990s and 2000s, recovery was a noun, a state of being you hoped to attain through all the things you weren't doing, like training, standing around on your feet, staying out late socializing, or getting caught up in stressful activities. Recovery meant resting, and the only thing you did was sleep and lie back with your feet up and your nose in a book. Today, recovery has become a verb. It's something that athletes, pros and weekend warriors alike, do with almost as much gusto and drive as their training. Recovery even has its own gear now. The first time I heard someone say she needed to go do my recovery, I cringed. By the 10th time, I'd come to understand that recovery is no longer a waiting period between workouts. Instead, it's become an active extension of training itself. So I think that that's kind of a good introduction to the book and the subject matter. The first chapter of the book is about beer and running, a subject very dear to my heart. There's also a chapter about hydration and how sports drink manufacturers have made this completely unnecessarily and unduly complicated and convinced the general public that they need these special molecules called electrolytes, which are actually just salts that we're already getting in all the food that we eat. There's a lot of other stuff too, a whole chapter on placebos. But I know that we have a lot of people to get through and I don't want to be the jerk who takes up more time than allotted. So I think I'll end it there and make sure we have time for questions, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy. Anyone using the chat function, do you have a question for Christy before we go to our next reader? If not, I will ask a question.
Okay.
So you're going to have a beer with one athlete. Who would that be?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because I've actually had the honor and pleasure of meeting a lot of great athletes. Probably Megan Rapinoe.
Okay, great. All right. Do we have any other questions? All right, well, we'll go to our next reader. Maybe there'll be some more at the end. Thank you so much, Christy. Our next reader is Connie Shoemaker, reading from her general nonfiction, Taste the Sweetness Later, Two Muslim Women in America. Connie's interest in Muslim women began in Cairo, Egypt, when teaching English and writing for several news organizations there. The co-founder and director emeriti of Spring International Language Center, she is a board member of Immigrant Pathways Colorado. Connie.
Thank you. Taste the Sweetness Later is a culmination of more than 250 hour in-person interviews encompassing emotional life stories, discoveries, and love. The two Muslim women who share their stories grew up in the grip of murderous dictators. Nisrin is a Kurdish Iraqi whose childhood is shaped by the fear of Saddam Hussein's eyes that are watching every action and word. She marries a man who becomes an interpreter for the US Army after the invasion of Iraq. Anti-US factions threaten her husband's life, after his twin brother, a fellow interpreter, is assassinated. With the help of Lieutenant Colonel Joe Rice, a National Guardsman and former Colorado senator, the family escapes to the US and settles here in Colorado. Continents away, Iman, a Libyan, grows up in the shadow of madman Muammar Gaddafi. A very bright and talented young woman, she persists in her dream of higher education by fighting for a scholarship that will take her, hopefully, to the United States or Great Britain. She comes from a sheep herding family of 22 siblings, 22 brothers and sisters, to graduate study in the United States. After years of navigating restrictions on women, she marries, receives a scholarship, and in the midst of the Libyan revolution, sets out to the US with her husband and son. The interesting thing here as I interviewed these women is that there were two things that really stood out. One was that fear was so much a part of their lives. The second thing is that they didn't know the truth of what was happening. They didn't know what the real truth was. I'd like to take an excerpt from Nisrin's story that will give you an example of the fear factor. I asked Nisrin how her life in Baghdad affected her current life here in Colorado, and this was her response. She looked at me directly and didn't hesitate. She said, "Almost never have I lived in peace and security. Instead, I've always lived with fear. Saddam was president when I was born. And even now I'm scared to leave the door open, to leave it unlocked. Sometimes when I'm upstairs and can't sleep, I think I see someone coming into the room. I didn't feel that way in our first days here because everything was new, wonderful, and safe. I didn't have to worry at all. Then we got action to Chad in Iraq. At times I would remember everything and I was afraid again." And she paused for a few minutes. And then she said, "You know what, Connie? There is something I do when I'm afraid. It helps me the most. Every night before I go to sleep, I think about everything and thank God I got here and that my family is safe. I see my kids and my husband next to me, and I don't want anything else from this life." I'd like to take you quickly to Iman. Her village is not far from Benghazi, where the Arab Spring Revolution against Gaddafi has just begun. Iman has completed all the education she can in Libya and has been promised a scholarship to study in the United States. While waiting for the fulfillment of that scholarship, she enters an arranged marriage. And on the first night of her wedding, she says, "I'm going to Colorado. Would you come with me?" And hopefully, luckily, he agrees to that. And they wait in place for the system to take care of itself and the process to produce the scholarship. This scene takes place in the midst of power outages, shortages of water and petrol, and the distant sound of gunfire. The smell of lamb, mint, dill, and rosemary still lingered in the kitchen of their new house. 28-year-old Iman and her husband's niece, Susu, had just finished washing the dishes after cooking a hasty meal of soup. Susu had done most of the preparation because the odor of cooking food still nauseated Iman, who was 4 months pregnant. Sammy, her husband, was sitting on a cushion in the living room of their new home, fingering his prayer beads as he stared at the flickering light on the large TV screen, accompanied by half-tones of Arabic music. He had heard the Supreme Leader was going to an important speech to the Libyan nation that night. Maybe we'll learn what's really happening, Sammy thought to himself. Like a fulfilled promise, the TV screen was suddenly focused on the green Libyan flag, and the music changed to the marching sounds of the national anthem. Iman and Susu hurried into the living room and settled onto cushions next to Sammy. Iman placed her hands on her belly to comfort and protect the baby boy inside her. Suddenly, Gaddafi's Botox-puffed face, under a shock of curly, dyed black hair, jumped onto the screen with a blast of words in full volume. "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" he shouted. "You're the drug takers, the jihadis, and the rats," he ranted, threatening the demonstrators in the streets. In the background, a crowd of supporters jumped up and down, waving green flags in response to his invective. "You people taking Helio-Wassa drugs have been made crazy. We will cleanse Libya inch by inch, zenga, zenga, alleyway by alleyway, person by person, street by street, house by house." Iman shivered and pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders and over her belly. Sammy leaned forward, his nose almost touching the TV screen, as if his eyes could pierce through Gaddafi and learn the truth of what was taking place in the country. Both Nisreen and Iman have followed the advice given to Iman by her sheep-herding grandmother. That advice was to swallow it now and taste the sweetness later. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Do we have any questions? Don't see any now, so we'll, oh, wait a minute, we have a question. You mentioned that the women with whom you spoke did not know the real truth, what the real truth was. How do any of us know what the real truth is? Are we here in the U.S. different from these women?
Excuse me, that's an especially good question today, I think, knowing what the truth is. In a dictatorship, everything is controlled, and anyone who steps out of place, either in words or in actions, is immediately put into place or into jail, or sometimes assassinated. So I don't know how you find out the real truth. You try to look at what you have. Don't have media in these countries, a free media, and that makes a difference. We at least can try to find the truth in what we read and hear.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to go to our next reader. Thank you so much, Connie. Our last reader in the general nonfiction category is Michael Bennet, reading from his general nonfiction book, The Land of Flickering Lights. A senator from Colorado since 2009, Michael is recognized as a pragmatic and independent thinker and has built a reputation for taking on Washington's dysfunction to address our greatest challenges, including education, climate change, immigration, healthcare, and national security. When not in Washington, he lives in Denver with his wife and 3 daughters. As long as he promises not to filibuster, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. I promise not to filibuster. Adrian, I'm grateful to be here with all of you, and I hope everybody is well. The Land of Flickering Lights has a subtitle, which is Restoring America in an Era of Broken Politics. And I went to the Senate basically when Barack Obama was first elected president, and saw a decade when our exercise in self-government was almost, I think, destroyed by political forces that we're still contending with now with the election of Donald Trump. So I take the reader through a number of different stories. One is more painful than the next. The turning the Senate's constitutional responsibility to advise and consent on judicial nominations into a partisan exercise, the climate denial that's resulted from the corruption of our campaign finance system, the fiscal fights that have led us to have a ballooning deficit without investing in the next generation of Americans, the immigration fights that I was involved with as part of the Gang of Eight in 2013 that still are unresolved, the Iran deal that President Obama tried to strike in the middle of his administration while being undermined by 48 senators who wrote a letter to the mullahs in Iran. And the last 70 pages or so, I fall back in love with our democracy. It's a walk through Whitman, a walk through Baldwin, a walk through the speeches of Frederick Douglass and of our own Frank Carr, our governor. And the book concludes that the way out of this is for all of us to recognize that we are founders in the same way the people who wrote the Constitution, who fought later, the women who fought later to make sure women would have the right to vote, or people like Frederick Douglass, who ended slavery in his lifetime, we should think of as a founder, and we should expect that level of each of citizenship out of each of us. So here's a piece of uplifting part of a book. I can read you lots of unuplifting parts, but given what we're facing, let me finish just with this. We've been here before. I think of the America of my parents' generation in the grip of economic despair, Jim Crow racism, fervent isolationism, and a populist anger that took ugly forms. In 1941, as America was just emerging from under the weight of the Great Depression and the world plunged ever more deeply into global war, Franklin Roosevelt gave what came to be called his Four Freedoms speech, crystallizing American ideals before the eyes of the world. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. These, Roosevelt maintained, were the irreducible building blocks of a more just society and a more just global order. If we are again at one of history's turning points, as I believe we are, then we have a choice to make. One road leads back to the depths of the American past. In times of uncertainty, it's always been tempting for some to try to capitalize on our darkest fears. Anytime Americans have become anxious or worried, there have been those who saw advantage in fanning the flames. Theirs are not among the names inscribed on history's honor roll, yet sowing division can be all too easy. It is precisely at moments of crisis when the confidence of a people is at the lowest ebb. These are the moments when we are most tempted to abandon our democratic traditions. They are also the moments when confidence in oneself and confidence in one another are needed most. This is especially true in a republic where only the citizens can answer the fire bells at night. If we are to remain a republic, no one alone can fix it. When we hold on to our values through tough times, we forge them anew, as Roosevelt did in his time, and burnish them for future generations. These values are made stronger and more useful to those who will face challenges in days far ahead. At times of deepest crisis in our past, we have ultimately overcome malign forces wishing to hoard the promise of democracy for themselves. When we succeed, we recast our freedoms for the trials of our own time, consistent with our ideals. Freedoms to be won not simply through government action, but more important, by what all of us do in our homes and our communities. We treasure the freedoms embodied in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. But like Roosevelt, we must think more ambitiously, and as we do, should remember the lesson of that throw of the dice. What does a just society look like? And I suggest that the four freedoms we should have today is the freedom to rise, the freedom to learn, freedom from violence, and the freedom to govern ourselves. So thanks for having me tonight. Thank you. I look forward to hearing all of your presentations.
All right, thank you. We do have a question for you from Steve. It says, you mentioned Baldwin. I assume you meant James Baldwin. What inspires you most about his writing?
Well, I think, I quote him at the very beginning of the book, and I quote him at the end of the book. First of all, I believe he wrote the greatest magazine story that's ever been written in the history of America, and in The Fire Next Time. And I quote him at the beginning of the book and the end, writing at the depths or the heights, however one wants to think about it, of the struggle for civil rights in the 60s. He writes, everything now is in our hands. We have no right to assume otherwise. And that's what I absolutely believe about the situation we find ourselves in today. Everything now is in our hands. We have no right to assume otherwise. And the reason we have no right to assume otherwise is there's a generation of Americans, I used to work for them when I was superintendent at the Denver Public Schools, who are going to school every day in the hope that they're going to be able to participate in a democracy that functions and make a contribution to our economy. I think Baldwin was speaking for them when he was doing the work that still today is unfinished. And I think we need to acknowledge that. I do all over this book. In many ways, we've gone backwards from the time that I was in college from a civil rights perspective in many respects. So I draw a lot of inspiration from Baldwin, both in terms of the style with which he writes, but also the content of the substance of his arguments.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a moment to ask any questions of any of our general nonfiction finalists. If you want to go to the chat, please put your questions here now. Otherwise, we'll move on to history. So we'll give a moment for someone to post a question. And this is for any one of our speakers. All right, well, I don't see anything popping up, so we're gonna move on. Thank you. All right, our next, now we're in the finalists for the history category. So first up is Deanna Karras, who will read from her history, Nighthawk Rising, a biography of accused cattle rustler Queen Ann Bassett of Browns Park. An award-winning author of nonfiction articles and books, Diana grew up a Browns Park cowgirl in the famed region where Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah converge. Decades of research and writing have rendered Karras an authority on the spellbinding history of the area. Diana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. My deepest gratitude to everyone involved with the Colorado Book Awards. It's just a joy and such an honor to be here among such talent. This biography, Nighthawk Rising, follows the life journey of cattlewoman Queen Ann Bassett. It's a true story of the American West, and it's an inquiry into one of the most intriguing eras in the settling of the Rocky Mountains. Ann Bassett's family ranched in northwestern Colorado in the infamous valley of Browns Park, where outlaws came and went, and feuds in the surrounding range were well known. Ann dwelled within both the splendor of her valley and the danger that her time period presented. Queen Anne was of branding irons and drifting trail dust, and she was romanced by wild horses, cattle herds, chaps, and big hats. Her childhood on the ranch was filled with adventure, such as the time she was nearly killed when she roped a grizzly cub. Ann Bassett was self-confident and even arrogant at times about her abilities on the back of a horse. These qualities, along with the easily ignited temper, earned her the title of Queen from a cowhand she slapped across the face. Anne's maturity, though, was unavoidably fastened to the deadly conflicts of the times, as the beautiful young woman and her cattle ranching family were caught up in the turbulence of outlaws, Native American skirmishes, and especially range war. Complex truths and falsehoods had formed a toxic brew on the rangeland and in the courts, pitting cattle barons against the owners of small ranches. This book, for the first time, reveals the truth behind the men Isam Dart and Ann Bassett's fiance, Matt Rash, and the terrorism inflicted on them and on Anne by Tom Horn. Queen Anne was threatened and shot at as she clashed with cattle barons and pushed against their massive herds. After all was said and done, this compelling woman, Ann Bassett, was destined to ride into legend with the title Queen of the Cattle Rustlers. Ann Bassett and I share many things. Although we lived 7 decades apart, we were the daughters of Browns Park cattle ranchers. My family's ranch house sat just across the Green River from the meadow on Willow Creek, where Ann was born. She and I grew up admiring regal mountains while riding the same trails. After spending long days in the saddle working cattle, we were both escorted home by the grace of nighthawks soaring overhead. Therefore, I wrote about Queen Anne's surroundings from intimate knowledge. During my years of researching and writing this book, I experienced many magical moments. as never before published research and rare photographs found their way to me and onto the pages of this book. My reading this evening is from the book's beginning passage. Deep within the wilds of the American West on May 12, 1878, a spring storm unleashed from a sky of overcast chill. Soon, water-laden snowflakes made mounds upon the roof of a windowless cabin and melted silently into the silver ripples of nearby Willow Creek. The plaintive sound of a newborn began drifting through the walls of log and into the whiteness beyond. Anna Maria Bassett whimpered and cried for nourishment her mother could not provide. Never before had a white child been born to this valley that now cradled Anna's tiny life. Even as she was born, destiny entwined this child with the narrative of the charismatic valley of her birth. As the years passed, the valley of Browns Park nurtured this girl called Anne to perfection. Anna Maria, a pharaoh-like beauty with cinnamon red hair and eyes the green of sagebrush after a sweetening rain, came into bloom as a cowgirl. Queen Anne Bassett was a stunning portrait when on the back of a horse, but the trails she rode were rugged and dangerous and took her headlong into the storms of the times. She knew outlaws, including Butch Cassidy and his partner Elsie Lay. They shared her valley and called her friend. However, stock detective Tom Horn infiltrated her life and wrecked her dreams. Grim-faced and enraged, Queen Anne moved with the rhythm of the loping horse beneath her, a rifle strapped to her saddle and at the ready. She rode hard, moving against the wind that swirled through the pinyons and cedars to defend her valley and avenge the man she loved. Queen Anne was a cattlewoman, arrested and tried for rustling. She was declared to be a terror and a wildcat, but also a heroine. About herself, she said, "I was a mangy coyote and loved it." In Browns Park in the spring of 1878, her journey began. That concludes my reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's see if we have any questions. I don't see any now, so maybe we'll have some at the end. So thank you again, Diana. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Our next readers are co-authors Daniel C. Guillet and Timothy K. Smith, reading from their history book, Scholars of Mayhem, My Father's Secret War in Nazi-Occupied France. Dan is the son of Jean-Claude Guillet, who began his clandestine career as an embedded agent in occupied France during World War II. A graduate of Manual High School, Daniel attended the University of Colorado and was the associate director of Rocky Mountain Planned Parenthood. He now splits time between Durango, Colorado, and Neve-sur-Seine, Jura, France. Timothy is a recipient of the Gerald Loeb Career Achievement Award for Editors, was senior features editor at Fortune magazine, and a reporter and editor for the Wall Street Journal. Educated at Brown University and the Sorbonne, he lives in Connecticut with his wife and 3 children. Dan and Timothy.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'm Dan Guillet. Tim Smith is, I believe, on as well. I met Tim first many years ago through a mutual friend in a small village in France, ironically. He was a gifted and experienced writer and editor. I had a story and he put it together. He is a talent and is responsible for much of the accomplishment of, that's included in this book. The story is of my father, and who was born in France, in Belfort, France. And his parents were professors at Smith College, so they would go back and forth for the school year in living in Northampton, Massachusetts, and in the summertime returning to summer homes in France. He was a privileged young man, and as was his family, and takes off, the story actually takes off with the beginning of the war when he was a freshman student at Harvard, just turned 18, was relieved to receive his draft notice because his grades were struggling in his first semester. And he was recruited by Wild Bill Donovan with the OSS because of the knowledge of language and culture and the intimacy of his knowledge of the French countryside. The story is a true story that I grew up with, the suspicion of, not the facts of. It was classified as top secret in America and most secret in Britain until 1998, when it was finally declassified for the most part. There are sections that still remain classified. So it's been a lifetime process for me to uncover, to unearth the truth and find the story. And that's what the book is about, is the unearthing of my father's story and where that led to his clandestine career. Eventually, the first mission in occupied France in June of 1944, stopping a group called Das Reich, and which was a armored panzer division that was Hitler's favorite and most powerful panzer division that was sent to Normandy beaches to repel the invasion of D-Day. My father and 3 others, secret agents, organized the French resistance and delayed them for over 3 weeks from arriving at Normandy. And by then, Patton had already had his breakout from the Normandy beaches. So Eisenhower called the team's actions essential and critical to the success of D-Day. The story has never been told until now, and in part because of the classification, and in part because my father would never speak about it, being a perfectionist, and he took the Official Secrets Act when he signed up with OSS and was unable to bring himself to ever mention it. So during my childhood, we traveled a lot. We had a very unique lifestyle, and we were back and forth overseas to the South Pacific, and to spots that most people didn't go to in those days. Some were glamorous and some were not. And so that's the underpinning of the story, is the development and unearthing of his story. I'd like to read just from the foreword of Scholars of Mayhem to give you a sense of it. I stood with my father, Jean-Claude Guillet, by a corrugated metal hangar at the Lons-le-Saunier airport in eastern France, watching a blue and white Cessna 182 make its final approach. Jean-Claude did not allow the anticipation he felt to show in his expression. It was 9 a.m. on a sunny summer day that promised to build into a very hot Jura afternoon. A single tattered windsock fluttered in the light breeze. The Cessna, an old one, was an old one, perfectly ordinary, except that someone had removed its transponder, the device that would have identified it to air traffic controllers. Bob was a pilot. The pilot was Bob Loubier, a 77-year-old Frenchman wearing Ray-Bans and a handlebar mustache. In the co-pilot seat rode his friend and former wife, Catherine, an easygoing beauty, some 20 years his junior. 5 days before, on June 24th, 2000, Bob and Jean-Claude have been reunited for the first time since the liberation of Paris in 1944. They both had attended the opening of a museum in Wormlow, England, devoted to the memory of Violette Zabot, an English secret agent who was a heroine of the French resistance. Bob, who stood 6'4", wore a chest full of medals and ribbons. Jean-Claude, who was 5'10", wore none of his. Their handshake turned into a long embrace. "My God, Jean, you've gotten very old," Bob said in French. Jean-Claude replied, "I'm still 6 months younger than you." The museum opening was, of course, a general hubbub of war veterans, politicians, even a few movie stars attended. Newspaper reporters and a BBC film crew completed the interview. It was no place for competed for the interviews. It was no place for a real conversation. So Bob and Jean-Claude agreed to have a private reunion at the little chateau where my wife Carol and I spend summers in Neuvy-sur-Seine, a village of 200 souls in the Jura region. Bob would fly in from Paris where he lived, and they would have a chance to go over the extraordinary history they shared with Violette, and also perhaps whatever they could divulge about the 56 years since they had seen each other last. We watched the Cessna descend toward the grassy airstrip bordered by white painted rocks. My father's face betrayed nothing. I was aflame with curiosity, especially as I knew that the wartime records of the unit both men had served with had finally been declassified. My father, a discreet, formal, French-born American, a perfectionist in all he did, had never spoken of things that were officially secret. The Cessna kissed the runway, its wheels sinking in a little ways into the grass, and taxied to the hangar. Bob and Catherine climbed out of the plane into our car. It was a short ride to the chateau along the bank of the Say River, through the village, through our gated wall, past our little vineyard and trout pond, and up to the 250-year-old house. We settled on the terrace with coffee. Bob began by asking Jean-Claude, "What did you do after being dragged off to the airport by the MPs?" He alluded to their partying in Paris in September 1944. "I spent a few days at Baker Street," Jean-Claude replied. Number 64 Baker Street in London was at the time the headquarters of an organization called Special Operations Executive, or SOE. The few people who knew of its existence nicknamed it the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Its operatives were called the Baker Street Irregulars.
Hey, Daniel, I'm really sorry to interrupt. We're kind of running long on time, and we have a question.
No problem.
For you, so.
I can take that.
Okay.
And that was the beginning of his ability to be able to discuss the story, and the first unearthing that my wife and I were able to sit into and begin asking questions and building a greater reference from what I had gleaned through my childhood of my dad's clandestine life. He went on to another mission in China and Burma with OSS, and then wrapped it up with a 13-year stint as an operations chief in the CIA through the Cold War period. And the story is about that. So that will take me through today.
All right, thank you so much. Is Timothy on the line? Does he want to say anything briefly? Tim, if you're on the line, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Okay, we do have one quick question, if you could answer this one briefly. Dan, did you learn anything surprising about your father while researching for this book?
Yes, the dichotomy that he had as a quiet, reserved, controlled academic intellectual was incongruous with most of his action in OSS, SOE, and what I've heard and read in files of the CIA. And so it was similar to multiple personalities that he was able to project and master. I knew him as my father, obviously, but yet you would get glimpses of his ability of knowledge of self-defense and of critical analysis in his thought.
All right, thank you so much. All right, our next reader in the history category is Mark Olmasic, reading from his book, The Storm on Our Shores, One Island, Two Soldiers, and the Forgotten Battle of World War II. A Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and best-selling author of The Big Year and Halfway to Heaven, Olmasic won the 2009 National Outdoor Book Award for Outdoor Literature, the 2003 National Press Club Award for Environmental Journalism, and was the lead writer for the Denver Post team that won the 2000 Pulitzer Prize. Mark, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks a million for having me. I'm really, thanks so much to the Humanities Council and the Book Awards. What a fantastic group of stories and really diverse people here. So I'm really honored to be here. Thanks so much. About 15 years ago, I was working on my first book, which was about competitive bird watching, of all things. They ended up making it into a movie with Jack Black and Steve Martin and Owen Wilson. And when I was researching that book, I learned about a place called Attu, A-T-T-U. Maybe if you do crossword puzzles, you've heard of it. Otherwise, probably not. It's the easternmost island in the Aleutian chain of Alaska. It's out there, so far out there that they actually curve the international date line around it to keep North America on the same calendar page. Well, for a time, Attu Island was actually the greatest place in North America to spot rare species of birds. And so when I was researching my first book, The Big Year, I learned that Japan had invaded and conquered Attu during World War II. I took history classes in school. I didn't know that. The first US soil lost since the War of 1812. The only ground battle of World War II fought on North American soil. And I also didn't know that Attu was a particularly vicious battle. It had a casualty rate that was exceeded in the Pacific War only at Iwo Jima. Still, I'm a journalist. I'm interested in the stories of people. I'm not a military historian. But when I found out that there were two men, one an Appalachian coal miner and the other a surgeon from Hiroshima who was drafted against his will to fight for Japan against the United States, the country he loved and where he had attended med school. Well, I was hooked. And especially when I found that the two families of the men who had fought each other on the island of Attu, that the two families had spent 40 years trying to fight each other and seek peace and atonement from each other. That's really what got me going. And so it took me a lot of time to tie down this story. I spent a bunch of time in windowless rooms at Elmendorf Air Force Base and Anchorage, the National Archives out in College Park, Maryland, college libraries in Oregon and Los Angeles. Here in Denver, we're really lucky to have a Western history collection at our central library and fantastic librarians who work it and are great with help with research. Anyway, it all ended up with this book, The Storm on Our Shores. And here's the beginning. Laura Davis was confused. In the living room of her home stood a fidgety old man, but she did not know what the visitor wanted. He talked about his grown children. He talked about his Arizona retirement. And he talked on and on and on about his beloved orchids and all their beauty and their fragility and their rewards. Davis had little patience for exotic flowers or idle chit-chat. She was an intensive care nurse scrambling at home with 5-year-old fraternal twins, her live-in elderly mom, and in an increasingly rocky marriage. She tried to be polite, but really, wasn't it time for this guy to go? Finally, it was. As Laura walked the man outside to his car, he paused, then wheeled around. By the way, he told her, I'm the one who killed your father. Laura reeled. Was this some kind of a sick joke? By the way? What kind of talk was that? So casual, yet so devastating. With his black framed glasses and shock of white hair, the visitor looked like a lanky grandfather, not some demented prankster. He seemed nervous, too. His face was ashen and grim. Before Laura could ask a question, the man dropped into his driver's seat, checked his rearview mirror, and drove away. He left Laura so stunned she felt dizzy. She'd been through a lot in her life. Crushing childhood poverty, a life-changing move from Japan to the United States, the birth of her beloved children. But she'd always had one deep hole in her life. She had never met her father. He died when Laura was a baby, before she had babbled even her first word. The little she knew about her father came almost entirely from her mother, who wasn't saying much. Laura had been too busy raising her own family to spend time researching the past of a man who only existed as framed photographs on the wall of the family home. With a few brief words uttered in front of a house in Sherman Oaks, California, the lives of Laura Davis and her visitor were changed forever. Laura would spend the next years scrambling to uncover her family's past. The visitor would struggle to overcome his own past. They would each learn about honor and courage, anger and forgiveness, the duty of a man to serve his country, even if the result was a pain that would not go away. They would become enmeshed in a military battle long forgotten, on a miserable island far from civilization, a place that claimed thousands of lives but ultimately yielded no prize for its conquerors. Davis and the visitor would discover the secrets that had ruined lives and the truths that had helped to heal them. They would find fathers who soared with joy and others who shouldered burdens that grew unbearable. They would learn about scars that could heal only with atonement. At the center of all these revelations would be the diary. In his last 18 days on Earth, when Laura's father was doomed and knew it, he had written a diary, his final farewell to the family he had just started and the daughter he had never met. That diary had been recovered by the stranger at Laura's door that day. It had been passed around to thousands of U.S. servicemen. How the diary would change hands and change the hearts of so many who read it would be the greatest lesson of all to Laura. So that's how the book starts. Thanks
so much, Mark. Let's just see if we have a question for you here. If not, we have a moment for those who are watching. We have a moment to ask a question of any of our history readers tonight. If you have a question, please put it in the chat function. Otherwise, we'll move on to Pictorial. All right, well, I'm not seeing a question, so thank you, Mark. We'll move on to our next category. Our final category tonight is Pictorial. Our first reader is Patrick Lair, reading from his pictorial book, Bird Parade. A Denver-based creative professional, Patrick pursues interests related to storytelling, visual art, and media production. He has published several books, including two children's books written and illustrated for HarperCollins Publishers. A Colorado native, he earned his MFA in visual arts from Lesley College of Art and Design in Boston, Massachusetts. Patrick, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adrian. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Colorado Humanities and Colorado Center for the book, for giving these awards and for organizing this event. This is my book, Bird Parade, and I wrote and illustrated the book, and it's published by a Colorado-based publisher. They're called Centipede Press. And the introduction to the book was written by a guy named Nathan Ballingrud, and he's an award-winning author, and he wrote a very thoughtful introduction, and I'm very appreciative for that. The book was printed in a limited edition of 500 copies, and it's available through the publisher. It's a little hard to get a hold of, but in the fall, a paperback edition will be available, and it'll be more widely available. So this is sort of a unique item, the hardbound version. And the story for this book is set in Colorado in the 1970s. It's a fictional illustrated short story about two boys who get into some trouble with a gun. It's a coming of age story. It's somber, it's dark, it's surreal, and it tells the story of these two boys who sort of lose their innocence in a traumatic way. And it's based very loosely on my own childhood here in Colorado. I was born and raised in Colorado. And the book was in development for probably over 10 years. I kept rewriting it and trying to figure out how I was going to illustrate it. And at some point, I came up with an illustration style that mixes photography and drawing. And I was sort of off and running, and I finished the book. But because we're talking pictorial here, I'll just show you there's a whole variety. It's a fully illustrated sort of graphic novel. It's best viewed while you're handling it instead of over the internet. But nonetheless, here, I will read a little bit from the book. I figure I'll just start at the beginning. It'll set the context, and if you're interested, you can read a copy. And so this is the opening spread, and it says, I know that winter is near because the sparrows are flying low over the house. Every year they take over the sky. There must be millions of them, maybe billions. It looks like a big black snake is weaving its way through the sky. Today, the sparrows aren't flying over the Nelson's house or the Jenkins house. Today, they're flying over my house. My grandpa built this house, and my dad grew up in it. My parents bought it from my grandparents, and now it's ours. It's a good day because the sky is gray and a light rain is falling. I like the rain because my sister stays indoors, and I can do whatever I want. I've never seen the bird parade on a rainy day. I wonder why the birds are flying in the rain. Today is different. Last year, Dad gave me a pellet gun, and Dennis and I thought it would kill one of those little birds for sure, but somehow they see the pellet coming and scatter out of the way. Dennis and I can never seem to hit one. Dad says the birds are flying to Mexico for vacation, but I know that isn't true. Dad has gone on business this week. If I talk to him on the phone, I'll tell him that the bird parade has started. Dennis has been my best friend since 3rd grade. He's my only friend, really. We're in 5th now and sit next to each other in class. We sit right in front of Miss Weathers. She says she needs to keep an eye on us. Dennis's family's always yelling and fighting, so he comes over to my house after school every day. Together we watch the bird parade. We should try to kill a bird today, I said. And it goes on from there.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Let's just see if there's a question for you here. I don't see one, so we'll have some questions at the end of this category. So thank you again for that reading.
Thank you.
Next up is Tej von Bohlen and illustrator Britton Lee Trauber, who will read from their pictorial book, Flatland. Tej is an associate professor of fiction at the University of Colorado, Denver, where he serves as fiction editor for Copper Nickel and advises the student newspaper, The Century. Nominated for a Pushcart Award in 2020, his first novel. The Pull of the Earth won the Colorado Book Award in 2007. The stories in Flatland are drawn from his life and family in central Illinois, where his corn-fed heart still beats. Britton is a graduate of Bennington College, bachelor's in visual arts, and Illinois State University, an MFA in photography. She has taught at the Millikan University, Illinois State University, and the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Her work is in a few great collections, many homes, and fine publications. She currently lives in rural Vermont. So Tej and Britton, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I just first want to thank Colorado Humanities and the Center for the book for their fantastic work year after year after year, providing great support and outlets and appreciation for the literary endeavors of Coloradans. So thank you so much for that. I'm also really pleased to be part of such a great group of writers, not only in our 3 categories, but this year is an amazing treasure trove of really, really great writing. So this is a great year to be sort of a part of all this. So thank you for that as well. I'm gonna talk just really briefly about the book and then turn it over to Britton to talk about the photography. This book was started because I attended Britain's senior grad school show, and we were drinking blueberry ale on her porch. And I was talking about the flash fiction that I was writing and still writing about where we grew up. And she was, her senior show was all about rural photography, which I think she's about to talk about briefly. And that was really where this book started. We thought, why not put some stuff together and see how they speak to one another. And that was the genesis of the project. And it took us a long time to find the right balance for story and photography, and to put things together in a way that was sort of a third presence on the page, as opposed to being illustrative or narrative. They really come together to create this sort of third presence on the page. So I'm going to read one really brief piece of flash fiction from the collection. But first, Britton, did you want to talk about the rural photography stuff? You're muted.
Sorry. I feel a bit like the odd man out here, and I want to thank you guys all for letting me occupy this space with you. As a visual artist, I'm in awe of writers, as I am not a word person, so pardon me. But where this book really started from was my interest in rural photography and rural culture, and especially the history of how rural communities are portrayed and who gets to portray them. Going back to kind of the history of the FSA and how photographers were sent out to document what was going on in the United States. And the further I got into my documentary studies, the less and less that I saw of rural communities and people being represented by actual rural photographers. So that has been my almost 15-year quest now as a photographer, is communities in Hawaii, Vermont, Arizona, and of course this book in Illinois, and that's what my real interest is. I will say it's kind of a niche market. It's definitely not a lucrative area to be in. Everyone knows New York street photography, but my intent as an artist is to really apply a critical eye to the communities that I'm familiar with without being harsh, but to also be gentle without being nostalgic. And that's an ongoing process of reaching that balance. And I do have to say, this book is almost a 10-year collaboration between us. I don't think that I could have undergone this with anyone other than Tej, who is a fantastic collaborator and really just one of my personal favorite authors. So I'm going to bring up just the cover screen, and we'll soon be adding this gallery to my website, or you can buy the book and enjoy all of the stories and the photographs together. So thank you so much, everyone.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad Britton talked about the sort of honesty part of it, because I think that's a big part of what we were trying to do. And I'm just going to read, like I said, one piece of flash from the collection, and this is the title story, Flatland. And I chose this because it sort of talks about the purpose of writing it and of representing what's too often called flyover country to the rest of America. So this is called Flatland. This is a place where a person can see everything coming. The earth is level, at least from a distance. The bubble is centered. There's nothing to move you. You can see it in the unrippled water. Where the land is flat, there's water everywhere. Culverts to towers, murky to potable. It feeds nursing mothers and tall grass and budding corn and braying animals. It comes carrying nothing for invitation, leaves carrying nothing for your thirst. It floods, it drowns, it quenches, it recedes. You will want the water when it's here, lament it when it's gone. There is no such thing as just enough. Your father lost his yields 2 years running because of water. The first year was drought, the dry dirt cracking wide as though opening its mouth. begging for rain that never came until it was too late. That year, your father prayed every night at supper, first for the rain and later for the grace to survive the year. But next season was no better, only different. The rain came then like a plague, squatting over the plains and refusing to move on. Stalks set in water and rotted from the root, withering from the excess blessings that came too late. The joke was that folks had prayed too hard the year before, but the unspoken fear was that they'd not prayed hard enough. An act of God excuses itself, and a linear horizon might convince you that there are no mysteries. But this is a lie. There are dark lakes, wailing babies, wooded gullies, family dinners, abandoned trestles, church choirs, and deep and secret shadows that stretch across every backyard. It doesn't matter if you can see for miles, if you never bother to look up. And when you're here a while, when the flatness of the world gets into you, when you accept your position as a part of it, as another reason for the consistency of the horizon, you realize sometimes when something is this even, this expected, this calm, it begins to draw you down, creates negative slope. It pulls you into it, inch by inch, promising to take you away.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, let's see if we have questions for you. I see a couple of comments. They look like fan mail. They're not in the form of a question. One says, woohoo, that's all, from Andra. And Bryn writes, my amazing cousin and sister, yay. So let's see if we have any more questions. I don't think we have any more questions, so thank you again so much.
Thank you.
And finally, the last pictorial category belongs to Jill Tejan and Barbara Bridges, who will read from Hollywood, Her Story, An Illustrated History of Women and the Movies. Jill is an author, speaker, and electrical engineer, and the co-author of Her Story, A Timeline of the Women Who Changed America, which received, oh, I'm sorry, I said Jill, yeah, which received the Daughters of the American Revolution History Award Medal. She has conducted research into historical women around the world for the past 30 years and speaks around the country about women's contributions to history. Co-author Barbara Bridges has spent much of her life as a businesswoman. In 2006, she founded Women Plus Film, a program in partnership with Denver Film, bringing audiences together with movies that ignite discussions around the global issues facing women today. Jill and Barbara, the floor is yours. I think you're on mute, unless, yeah, there you go. Now we can hear you. I can hear Barbara. I see Barbara. And I guess we're looking at Jill's screen.
Jill needs to unmute.
Jill, can you unmute?
Jill, where are you? Where are you, Jill?
Well, Barbara, do you want to go ahead and say something while we're waiting for Jill?
Well, I hate to take her part of the presentation. I know that she's here. That's the problem. So,
Am I here now?
Yay, Jill.
All right. Hi, everyone. We're so happy to be here with you virtually. It seems hard to believe that it was 4 years ago when we started on our beautiful book, Hollywood, Her Story, An Illustrated History of Women in the Movies. We learned that women helped found the movie industry. They were the early filmmakers, owned studios, and developed many of the filmmaking techniques that are still in use today. Women thrived in the industry in the silent film era. In the 1920s, when movies started making money, men took over, and the women were pushed out of many areas of filmmaking. Unions were formed, and women were not allowed to join. Women are still working to reclaim all the roles they had at the beginning of the movies. We have only a few minutes to give you a taste of the more than 1,200 women in the book, and it's 1,000 images. The book is divided into decades, from the 1890s to the present.
The year was 1896. The woman was Alice Guy Blaché, the first woman filmmaker. Her first film was The Cabbage Fairy, less than a minute long. It showed us where babies come from, The Cabbage Patch. We got to go back a slide. There we go. Alice was the first to see the possibilities of using film to tell stories. One of the first individuals to make films on a regular basis, she experimented with sound and employed the first special effects. In 1910, she became the first woman to build and operate her own studio called Solak Studios. It was located in Fort Lee, New Jersey, the hub of filmmaking in America in the early years of the industry. Over her career, she made more than 1,000 movies and was a producer, writer, and cinematographer in addition to being a director. She said, "There is nothing connected with the staging of a motion picture that a woman cannot do as easily as a man, and there is no reason why she cannot completely master every technicality of the art."
Thousands of women with passion and commitment to storytelling followed in her footsteps. Working in all aspects of the movie industry, they collaborated with others to create memorable images on the screen. Our book is intentionally inclusive. We cover the women that everyone knows and loves, the movie legends, and hundreds of women whose names are unknown to you. Actresses, directors, stunt women, screenwriters, composers, animators, editors, producers, cinematographers, and on and on. In fact, we have 26 categories in our book, denoted by these icons. Each woman has one or more icons next to her write-up so that you can quickly identify women across all of the categories necessary to produce movies. And you know from watching the movie credits at the end of the movie, it takes so many people to make a movie.
Throughout the book, we show images, tell stories, and provide quotes. We also include historical information that adds perspective about the time frame in which the women were working. Here we see Mae West in 1932, a woman who redefined how Americans view sex. We just love her quotes like, "It is better to be looked over than overlooked. I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it." And our favorite, "I used to be Snow White, but I drifted."
The book begins with Alice Guy Blaché and finishes with Agnes Varda. She was a legendary French film director, editor, writer, and producer. Agnes received an honorary Academy Award in 2018, the first female director to be so honored. She said, "I am a feminist. I am a filmmaker. I am a woman. That doesn't make me a feminist woman filmmaker." She also said, "My pleasure is to show women in their totality, their joys, problems, potentials, and above all, the unique rhythms by which they live their lives."
This book pays tribute to the spirit, ambition, grit, and talent of these filmmakers and artists. For more than 100 years, women have enhanced the movie industry with their incredible accomplishments. They are to be celebrated for their achievements. Hope abounds that they will be able to fulfill their dreams and thrive in the decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill and Barbara. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Okay, we have a question from Kevin. Having been able to examine women's place in the industry from decade to decade, would you characterize the treatment and appreciation of women as improving? Is it a linear change, an exponential curve, or an oscillating wave, or something else entirely? In other words, is it seemingly improving, getting worse, stagnant, etc.?
Well, our overarching story is that women did everything at the beginning of the film industry. And then when it became big bucks in the middle, they were pushed out of many areas of filmmaking. And so then women have been trying to reclaim their place the whole time. I don't know if he's asking about the Me Too movement. We try not to go into that too much because we really just try to celebrate their accomplishments. We really just have like a paragraph in the book about that. But we just really want to celebrate all of their achievements and accomplishments. Jill, do you have anything to add to that one?
Well, Barbara, I think you really got it. And I understand the question. This is my nephew, by the way. And, you know, really, it's a declining curve. There, women did everything in the beginning, and then we came down. And only now is there really some potential for change when there wasn't before. So what we hope is that it's going to improve, and that we will not stay in stagnant or get worse.
All right. Well, we have one more question for you, Jill. I don't know if this is a relative. It's from Steve. Why do you think Agnes Varda doesn't get the recognition she deserves?
Well, it's so interesting. Barbara and I have been involved in a number of documentaries and other kinds of work recently. And the first woman who was nominated for Best Director, Lina Wertmuller, when she was nominated at the Oscars, they didn't even show the right woman when they read her name from the panning of the audience. And to me, what it shows is that, and it's not just women, by the way, it's women and minorities, do not get the recognition that they deserve, do not get credit for their accomplishments. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is we're trying to ensure that these stories get told so that people understand that there are many creative, capable people, and all of those people need to have opportunities to tell their stories.
Thank you. Okay, we had an earlier question for Tej and Britton. Your collaboration reminds me of songwriting. Sometimes the music comes first, sometimes the words. Is it the same with your collaboration? And this is from Steve.
Yeah, Britton, can I handle that one, Britton?
Absolutely.
I'm glad that they do remind some readers of songs. I say in the dedication that each one of the stories in there is a love song, and I think that there's equal amount of love coming out of the photography as well for the people and places. As far as the process goes, we developed all of these things, the photos and the stories both, completely independently, and then we looked for where the pieces matched up in ways that were not intended originally. So, and we did that very consciously so that neither medium, the writing or the photography, would seem predominant. And so we could try to achieve that sort of third presence on the page in an honest way. So neither one of them, or I guess all of them came first, or neither one of them are, that's the, Britton, you're on mute.
Yeah, you're muted. Okay.
I just want to clarify that didn't happen all at once, that
Right.
there was always this process of new stories and new images being kind of traded back and forth, even until like the last, edit of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So while we weren't really using each other's material as a specific prompt, there was still definitely that kind of growth of the body of work over that long amount of time. So.
All right.
For sure.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is for everybody. It seems like a lot of these works are really works of the heart, and you could see where they might be the one book you write, and then how do you move forward from here? What's your next thing that you're working on? Or are you working on another book? Are you focused somewhere else in your life? Anyone?
Well, Chris, I'll go first. This is Hollywood Her Story is actually my 9th book. I'm finishing my 10th book right now, hopefully over this weekend or early next week. And I don't even know how many, I think it's 5 more that I'm working on in the Her Story series. Mm-hmm. And so, but this book, the Hollywood Her Story book, just has taken on a life of its own. It became such a beautiful book with such an important story. And so it's very easy for me to have my heart in it at the
moment. Dan, I'm curious about you because it was about your father, so.
Yes, I'm currently working with a documentary film producer, 5-time Emmy Award winner. And we're writing the scripts together for that, as well as working with the logistics for filming in France, and recently was interviewed here in Durango by a film crew that flew in. So we're doing that. And I'm also underway with a second book about my father's mission, OSS mission in 1945 in China and Burma, which I'm going to also link into at the end of it, his work in the Cold War, CIA. But those will probably be the two books, definitely from the heart. It's been my a lifetime of unearthing and wondering and questioning how this what my father's life really was. And now at this stage of my life, I'm able to have the time to go ahead and research, because it's extensive. The first book took about 7 years of researching.
Anyone else?
I'll go real quick. I'm still writing flash fiction. Some of it's set in Illinois still, some of it not. Also working on my next novel, which is set back in Illinois, but Illinois is not the same kind of major character that it has been in my previous work. So I'm hoping to eventually write my way out of Illinois, but it hasn't happened yet.
My book, I'll go now. My book definitely, excuse me, is a work of the heart. I'll just say real briefly that I became a writer simply because my mother always wanted to write the history of Browns Park, the valley that we had such roots in and that we all loved so much. And she passed away before she was able to do that. And I always felt that she chose me, and it became my life's work. So definitely, I feel like I've carried forward for her. And Queen Anne, my grandmother was friends with her. We had so much in common, although we were so far apart, that to accomplish this, it was 7 years of very intense research and writing. So it's a wonderful dream come true to have it finished. Thank you.
Hey, everyone, we do actually have a question from the audience. So I want to just make you aware of it. It says, in light of the politically, socially, and emotionally tumultuous time we find ourselves in, what most important lesson do each of you hope your readers walk away with from your work? Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I will. I think that what my work has shown me is that every person has an opportunity to make a contribution, and every person has the ability to make a difference and to contribute and to be acknowledged for their accomplishments. And that's what I hope people will understand and get.
I also think that in our book, it's a book that people just so enjoy getting lost in. So during this time of staying at home, it's just such a wonderful book to have, because when people first open it, they just go through these 1,200 images, and they just love to say, I love her, I remember her, I know this movie. So that's the first level they read the book on, and then they can read the stories about the ones that they like, and then they can go in even deeper at the beginning of every decade and find out what was happening in the movie business and how women fit into it. So it's really a book to get lost in during this time of being at home.
I'll just say that my book was about two families who went to war. One man killed the other and won the third highest honor that the United States Army awards. He won a Silver Star for killing the other man in battle. The American was so distraught that he spent 40 years trying to seek out the family of the other man to seek peace and atonement. And I know that we live in a divided country. We can't get along. And I just look at this picture that is really moving to me of Dick Laird, an American war hero from Appalachia, who answered his nation's call and signed up and went to war and did exactly what his nation asked him to do and ended up with deep psychological scars because of it. And there's a picture of him with the daughter of the man he killed in battle. And they're grasping each other. And it's just a remarkable story to me of, the cameras weren't on him. Nobody asked them to be sincere and open their hearts to each other, but they did. And for me, that's really a story of what America's about and not what we read out of and see out of Washington. It's just how people are when they're not in the headlines. And I hope people can take that away from the story, that Americans have big hearts, and they're understanding, and they have empathy, and they're sincere, and they want to help, and they want to do their best. So that's what I learned from the story.
I'd like to add something here too. With my book is a little bit about Washington, but it's really about our history and our democracy, and some partly how poetry has informed it over the years. And I was reminded writing it of a couple things. One, of how tumultuous our history has been. We are living in a tumultuous time now, but we've overcome greater challenges in the past than the ones we're confronting today. And I think, the Baldwin quote I mentioned earlier says it all. We don't have any reason to expect our work's going to be any easier than the people who came before us, who had much more difficult burdens to overcome. But in working on the book, I fell in love with the idea of democracy again, and the importance that the important role each of us has to play to make that democracy work, and to make our pluralistic society actually function, and to understand that there are people, it's unfortunate, but there are people who see their political benefit in dividing the American people and in separating them instead of celebrating the pluralism that we have. So there's a lot at stake. And one of the things that I write in the book is that this is at the very end. Actually, it's an afterword at the very end, where I say that happiest moment for me when I have a town hall is when somebody comes up at the end and they sort of wait in line for a little while, and then they say, "What are you reading? Because what you're reading is not the same things that I'm reading. And I'd be curious to know what you're reading." So and the reason that's such a magical moment is that it's a moment where people who thought there was not a bridge to cross, or that there was going to be a chasm, find themselves crossing that chasm. So at the end of my book, there are pages and pages of suggested readings from people about history and about democracy and literature, all in service of giving people a sense that we've been here before. There's nothing new under the sun, and that if we play our part, things have a way of working out.
I think he just all asked you to send him a copy of your books so he can tell people what he's reading. That's what I heard.
I will. Please do, especially the expensive ones.
Anyone else want to answer this question?
I would like to just say that in the researching of my father's actions, that what became absolutely clear was that the secret agents that were recruited by America and England, many of them were women, and they paid a horrific price of sacrifice, as did the men. And the vast majority of them were immigrants themselves, freshly arrived in the United States, and they fought long, hard, and with voluntary courage, and most of them did not survive. About 85% of them died. It was a remarkable organization of people, of a collection of men and women from every different economic bracket and educational bracket. And they each brought with them skills that were needed for the success in America to fight off the Nazi campaign. And that would be a lesson that I would hope is remembered today long and hard, and that the necessity for leadership and of strong intelligence is essential for America.
Thank you. Anyone else before we close out the Q&A portion of this?
I just want to say that it's kind of nice for me to hear you all feeling so hopeful. I'm a journalist and I don't feel very hopeful right now. My profession's under attack. The media is under attack. People who are holding truth to power under attack. A lot of my friends are losing our jobs. I'm not sure that I'll be able to continue in this line of work because of what's happening. Ad sales and whatnot. Feels like pretty dark days, so I'm glad to find some rays of hope here.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll throw out there the primary lesson in my book, kind of like Jill and Barbara said, is that we all have the power to affect change. I think the twist in my story is that it sort of reminds you that that change can be for better or for worse, or for good or for bad. So you need to be very clear about what side you're on, because we get a lot of mixed messages in this country about what's right and wrong, but it's pretty clear if you stop and think about it.
Thank you.
If I can just having a little bit of a thought about what you all do as storytellers, and especially in this time of people needing to slow down and reassess their lives and everybody being so uncertain. I think that one beautiful thing that all of our storytelling and our words can do is inspire other people to examine their own lives and to possibly start telling their own stories. And that's what I really hope that someone might pick up our book and say, it's, you know, a book about, you know, small towns and stories about small towns, but it's really encouraging a much more universal idea that everywhere you look, there's a story. And sometimes, honestly, for me, that push to document is, as you were saying with journalism, not having hope. Just the ability to go out with my camera some days is what's getting me through this time right now. So for you guys, if that's helping you, please just keep writing.
Thank you. Well, if there is no one else, I will turn it over to Josephine. So thank you so much. Thank you for letting me be your guide tonight. Really appreciated hearing all of your contributions. Josephine.
Thank you, Adrian. And I want to just say, what are the lessons of barbecue for a time like this? Because I'm sure in your own amazing writing, you have discovered some wisdom for us. Would you share that?
I think the wisdom is all you can eat. Just get all you can while you can.
Understood. Well, this has been another amazing reading. I am attending all of them, and I find such contentment and calm and hope, too, when I get to listen to each category. So it's a real privilege. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all who stayed in and logged on to be with us. We'd love to hear from you any way you'd like to send a message through Facebook or email or whatever. Just let us know your thoughts, your questions. Again, thanks to Outskirts Press and Colorado Sun. And if you reach out to them for services or support, please let them know you're there, because they support the Colorado Center for the Book. And please support those local businesses by ordering books from the Book Bar. Next Friday is the last chance to catch these finalist readings live. Same time, same place, but anthology collections, creative nonfiction, and the hotly contested short story category. Next week, our MC will be Helen Thorpe. We're so fortunate to have her. And we have made a decision. Winners will be announced at an online celebration event broadcast live from the Evans School in downtown Denver, Saturday, May 30th, starting at 4 p.m. So stay tuned to our website and social media for details. Please do opt into our newsletter at the bottom of any page at coloradohumanities.org for online readings and celebration updates. Good night, and thank you again.